All right. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, divas and dudes at home joining us. I'm Raquel de Hoyos, and we are back for week 3. This is our series focusing on brain health, mental health, and lots of delicious recipes. So we've got a great one for you today. This one's pretty easy. So it's not going to take a lot, but we're going to walk through it and then make sure you all have a chance to sample it. And then we also have kind of an interesting nutrition segment today. And so I'm glad that you all came today. It's you know me, I like to kind of do things a little out of the box, but we're going to be talking about archetypes. And there's a particular author who just came out with a book that I wanted to share with you all because it's kind of in line with a lot of what I believe when it comes to thinking about how we relate to food and how that affects our mood and consequently how that affects how we choose the foods that we choose and kind of the patterns that we develop around our eating behaviors. So wanted to kind of change it up a little bit because you all are pretty good on the nutrition. Repetition is good, right? But wanted to kind of change it up a little bit and add some new elements to our nutrition. But today I'm excited because we have a really tasty recipe, and it's one that I just kind of use periodically as sort of my go-to side dish, but it can be used in a lot of different ways. It could be used as a base to like a grain bowl. It could be used as a filling to some kind of wrap, but it's a kale, mushroom, and farro salad. So has anybody heard of farro or cooked with it before? Okay, awesome. Well, one of my favorites, and you can find it pretty much anywhere, but this is one of my favorites because it comes from Trader Joe's. Now, if you don't live close to a Trader Joe's, you can find it at HEB or you can get it in bulk. But when you do that, the only difference is it will take a little bit longer to cook. So it's a whole grain, it's an ancient grain. And farro, actually, I learned this, refers to the type of grain. So there's different sizes and there's different varieties, I should say. This particular one I like because it only takes 10 minutes and you can cook it kind of like pasta. So what I did, just to kind of cut down on some time for us, is I cooked it in advance. But I wanted to show this to you because it is kind of my go-to because it only takes, it feels like less than 10 minutes, but you cook it basically in either water or I used chicken broth for this today. And you basically just put it in the pot with the broth, bring it up to a boil, and once it's boiling, just turn it down to a low simmer and let it cook until it's pretty much like al dente, like pasta. So it'll retain this nice kind of chewy texture, but it's great as kind of like an additional source of fiber. It's got some protein in it, and so remember we were talking about those foods that are good for our brain and good for brain health, and whole grains and things like this are definitely in that category. But I wanted to show you what it looks like after it cooks up. It looks a little almost like, I don't know, barley when it's cooked. So it kind of cooks up into this plump, nice little round, almost makes me think of oatmeal. And you could actually use it in either a sweet or a savory application. So today we're going to use it in this, I call it a salad, but it's kind of like a side dish, but you could make it as a cold salad as well. Anything that we do here today, you could put in the refrigerator and then just enjoy room temp or cold too. But I kind of like it on the side. Goes well with any kind of protein dish that you're making. Or if you do plant-based and you don't do any meat, it's great because it's got, you know, the protein in the grain. And also we have chickpeas today. So that's another plant protein that's great for us. Pretty versatile, pretty easy to find at the grocery store, right? You could also get dry chickpeas and just soak them and then make your own. But today we've got canned because I like simple, quick, and easy. And yeah, so this, let me pass this around just so you guys can see that. And I want to talk a little bit more about that because I thought it was kind of fascinating. So the farro, it's a type of wheat. And so it has also, it's a great source of iron and magnesium, and also a great source of antioxidants, which again, for brain health, we love, right? But basically there's 3 different sizes. So kind of like the bulgur wheat that I did the recipe with, there's different kind of coarse, there's fine, there's like in between. So it's it's helpful to remember sort of the names of them. So there's from the smallest to the largest. The smallest is called Ferro Piccolo. So it's kind of Italian, right? Or einkorn, you may have seen that. So that's like the oldest and the rarest. And they often mill these and turn them into flour. So you might have also seen it as a flour. The smallest one, which is not that one, this is the medium size. But if you ever find that one, it's the first crop to be grown by humans, which I find fascinating. It's like if you think about way back when, right? Like the history of food, I'm such a geek about that. But if you think about the things that people were eating, like that, this was one of those things. So it was domesticated about 5,000 years ago in the Middle East. And yeah, so it is typically used. This particular one, I think, was particularly used in baking, I think is what they said. And then the one that's kind of the most common is this type here that you'll see. It's kind of a medium size. It's grown in Italy, but it's spread across Europe, Africa, and Asia. And you tend to see it in things like these side dishes, pilaf, soup, salads, things like that. And then the largest is called Ferro Grande, which is also known as spelt. You may have heard that phrase as well. And that was cultivated in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, and it's the largest of that type of grain. And you see it a lot in bread baking because it's milled and then turned into the flour for that. So a little history there on farro, which I found fascinating. But what I'd like to start us off with is our recipe here. And again, very simple. What we're going to do is we've got all these great ingredients, not a ton here. But one of the other fun ingredients that I use, so I'll use a lot of interesting spices. And sometimes you'll go to the grocery store and you'll be like, that sounds fun, but I don't know what the heck to do with that. And this is where I kind of experiment and play with spices. Because this is a very simple dish. We have a grain, we have some chickpeas, and then some veggies, right? And a couple of, like condiments. We've got apple cider vinegar we're using for a little bit of tang, also some fresh lemon juice. And olive oil, but I wanted to kind of change things up with the spices. And today, the feature, the star spice, is this za'atar. Has anybody cooked with this spice? It is one of my absolute favorites. And it's kind of like a curry in that, depending on the region, it's a Middle Eastern spice. So depending on the region or even like the family who puts it together, it can have all different ingredients in it. Typically it's thyme, dried thyme, might be marjoram, oregano. There's toasted sesame seeds in there. There's a little bit of, sometimes you see dill in there. Sumac is another spice that's in there that tends to be kind of like this almost purpley, kind of granular spice. Has a nice tangy kind of citrusy flavor. I've seen this a lot in definitely Middle Eastern food, but typically like with fish or kind of sprinkled on hummus. I love to use it pretty much in anything because it has just a lovely flavor, but I wanted to pass that around too so you guys can give that a good smell and kind of take a look at that. I've seen some varieties that are always, this is kind of the typical color, it's kind of this greenish brown, but I've seen some that are red because you could add like chili flakes in there or maybe even saffron sometimes. I don't know, I've seen some different varieties of it, but what's the other thing I was going to say about that? I don't know, I love it, it's delicious, it'll come back to me. So let me get us started with this onion here, if I can get this burner to work. Yay, okay. Okay. So what I want to do first is just take, this is just a regular yellow onion. I'm going to cut this and make it super easy. What I like to do for this, just to kind of change it up, you could just dice it, but today I'm going to do a slightly different cut. I'm just going to cut it into strips, just so we have a little different texture. I try to play things up, change it up a little bit, but you could certainly use just a regular chopped onion, diced onion. And we're going to use the whole, actually, since I have a smaller pan, I'm just going to do half. So for our recipe, let me read that off because our pan's a little bit smaller, so I'm going to adjust our portions here. But we're basically using one package, so that's about 8.8 ounces of farro. It's about not quite 2 cups, so about 1 3/4 cups if you're just getting the bulk farro at the grocery store. I used about 2 cups of chicken broth, And so you basically cook that farro, like I mentioned, until all that liquid is pretty much absorbed. And you fluff it up kind of like rice. You could add a little bit of olive oil in there, a little salt, but I think if you're cooking it with broth, it tastes fine just like that. We're going to use 2 tablespoons of olive oil, and I wanted to make a note on the recipe. It's been a busy week. So where it says in a skillet over medium-high heat, add onions, we're first going to add our oil. So it's going to be 2 tablespoons of oil for the purpose of today in my smaller pan, probably just about maybe 1. Just regular olive oil. And so for my onion, I'm just going to make these nice long cuts here. You can cut it as thick or as thin. We're basically going to saute this onion down. You could use any kind of onion. A red onion would be really nice in here too, or white, depending on what you have at home or what you want to pick up at the grocery store. But I'm going to just do that. And I try to make sure that they're all kind of separated. You don't want any clinging together, all right? Okay. And then I'll just give that a little swirl. Okay. Should hear a little sizzle. Love it. Okay, great. So we're going to let that cook down and just keep an eye on it. You don't want it to be, you could caramelize it and like cook it. That'll take a few minutes. But if you're in a rush, just saute it until it's translucent. I'm going to turn this heat down just a tad because this has some power. So while we're doing that, the next thing I'm going to do is chop up some mushrooms. So my favorite mushrooms are these, which are creminis, essentially like baby portobellos, right? You could use white butt mushrooms as well. I just feel like these have a little more flavor. And one of the things that I like to do just to clean these off is take a wet paper towel. They sell like little mushroom brushes at the store, like gourmet food stores, but I just kind of do this. You don't want to completely run them underwater because that'll just make them, they're like a sponge, right? So just kind of dust them off a little bit. These are pretty clean. Ooh, got some fancy, fun stuff. I love this burner. Thank you, Rosie. Okay. Got a little cooking fun here. I'm going to do maybe 3 in here, maybe more. These are pretty big. This is just about 8 half a pound, 8 ounces of cremini mushrooms in the recipe. But I like, mushrooms are just kind of a nice meaty texture, right? So I cut them pretty thick to keep that texture, consistency. And I'm just going to trim off that little bit of end there. But you don't have to take the stems off. We're going to add that to our pan as well. That's already smelling great. So just make sure that all gets coated with the oil that was in there. And those mushrooms will start to release some of their liquid in a minute here. But I like to cook the mushrooms until they're just kind of a nice little brown. So we'll let that go for a bit. And I'll talk to you about a couple other things I have here. We have garlic. And so garlic, we were talking about how it has some good antimicrobial properties, right? Good for the immunity, keeps the vampires away. There are 3 cloves of garlic in here. I'm going to just do 1, but I love garlic, so I'm going to do a nice large piece. And you could mince it. You could use jarred garlic if you had that already minced up. I like to slice it. I just think it looks a little more elegant in this kind of dish. And you can actually see it. But what we're going to do is not add it right away, right? Because we still want this to cook down a little bit. So I tend to add this a little bit towards the end once I've got this where I want it to be. So I'm just going to slice these kind of thin here and keep them aside until I'm ready to add them to my dish. Okay, so we've got some great flavors with the onion. We've got some garlic. And then the other thing we're going to add is this kale. So this is beautiful kale. There's different kinds. Has anybody seen the purple one? Right? That's really lovely if you can find it. One of my favorites is something called dino kale or lacinato kale, which has kind of more of the flatter leaf, and it's much darker, and it's got kind of that rough, bumpy texture. So that's another kind. But this is just kind of your regular curly kale. And what I like to do is just remove this stalk because it's pretty fibrous and it's harder to digest. So you could probably, if you were like making a soup, keep that on. Sometimes when you buy like the bag of kale already chopped at the grocery store, it has those pieces in it. And I tend to find that they're a little too tough, so I'll take them out. This smells so good already. And so let me show you. I just saw one. I just saw this mushroom. It's looking great. So see how that mushroom's starting to turn that nice, beautiful brown. You could keep cooking it until your onions got a little caramelized. That would give it a nice, sweeter flavor. That is actually a sweet yellow onion. It doesn't look like one because it's more round than flat, but it is a sweet yellow onion. So the sugars in that onion will release, but that's kind of what we're going for. And then with the kale, it's like spinach, right? So in this whole dish, there's about, I think, 4 cups. I think I said 4 cups of kale. One bunch. It's about 4 cups once you remove the ribs and all of that. We're going to add it a little bit of at the end here, just so that it kind of cooks through. But you want it to still retain that nice green look to it, right? But the easiest way to prep this kale is to just take the stem here from the top and then just go pull down on it. Well, sometimes you have to do a little extra. I learned yesterday that my dog likes kale. He loves broccoli, which is funny because it's not typically something dogs will eat, but he's all about eating his vegetables, which I applaud. So he loves kale. I think he also just loves chewing on this. He's a funny little dog. He's a Yorkie Chihuahua. Yeah, he's cute. His name is Ringo. Actually, he's my mom's dog, but he's kind of by proximity, he's also my dog. Yeah, he's a cutie. Okay, so that's pretty much, what we want to kind of get to here. And then what I'll also do is just run my knife through that a little bit so we don't have these big pieces of kale in there. Make it a little easier to chew. This looks so great and it smells so good. I can't wait for you guys to try this. So I just kind of bunch it up like this, and then I'll run my knife through it, one way, and then maybe one more just for good measure. And then we've got that ready to go. And then don't forget the lemon. Fresh lemon, you know me, I love my fresh lemon. And then let me talk about a couple of the other spices we're going to use. So paprika is one of my favorite spices. We're going to use a little bit of smoked paprika in here just to give it some earthiness, kind of that smoke flavor. We also have red pepper flakes, just for a little bit of heat. You could leave that out if you're not a fan of that. And then a little salt and pepper. And that is pretty much it. So like I said, we're going to let this cook. It looks pretty good now, actually. I could keep cooking it until the mushrooms get even more brown. That's kind of my preference. But that's looking pretty good. So what I'm going to do now is add my garlic. And just to kind of bring out some more of the flavor of these spices, I add in the spices to kind of toast them a bit, but I don't want my garlic to burn. So let's see. Chili flakes. And then we've got our za'atar. Oh, I'm going to just do a little like that. And now it's going to smell wonderful, even more wonderful. That smells great. So see how you can take some very simple ingredients, stuff you can find at the grocery store, and just make it a little bit different, right? Make it a little unique. You have your friends over and you're like, hey, I just made this. And they're like, where did you buy this? And you're like, I didn't buy it, I made it. I get that a lot. They're like, hey, where did you get this, Raquel? Where did you buy this? I'm like, nah, I didn't buy it. I made that. And it's easy, and I'll show you how to do it. Okay, so we've got these beautiful colors here. We're going to add in, let's start with a little bit of our grain, just to kind of warm that through. And we'll add in our chickpeas as well. I'm kind of eyeballing measures because, again, we've got the smaller pan here. But I will make sure that you all get to try what I made ahead of time, which is the appropriate amounts. And then I often finish this with just a little drizzle of olive oil too, because olive oil is one of those healthy fats, right? So I like to include that in my diet wherever I can. I tend this one, probably extra virgin, yeah. The kind you can use for like sauteing. I'm gonna throw this in so you can see that, give it some color. And then just because it needs a little bit of liquid, I'm gonna do, the recipe calls for half the juice of a lemon. I really love fresh lemon juice and stuff like this. So if you try it with half and you're like, I could use a little more, go ahead and do a little bit more. And then a splash of apple cider vinegar, which is good for the gut, probiotics, right? We talked about that in the first week. This also provides a little bit of tang, so just kind of a little splash. And just to season it, we're going to do just salt and pepper. Now, if the red pepper flakes is spicy enough for you, you could omit that black pepper. But I'm going to add it in just to kind of balance things out. Oop, there goes our kale. And I will not do a fancy little toss here because I don't want the kale ending up over here on my friend. But this is looking pretty good. And so you're just basically sauteing this down until your kale breaks down a little bit, but it still has that beautiful, vibrant green color. It smells good. Oh, this kale wants to leap out of the pan. Okay. So I'll just mix that a bit, and then we'll add our salt and pepper. So just a little bit of salt. Pepper, and voila, that is what it looks like. So it looks similar to the picture, right? And you see how quickly that was? I mean, you can cook that, I'm a fan of doing things in advance if you can, but you could cook your farro in advance, keep that in the fridge, all week, and then just saute up your veggies right before you're going to have dinner. Get your kale. You could just buy the kale that's already in the bag, chopped up, and there you go. So that is our kale and mushroom farro salad. What do you guys think? Pretty easy, right? Yeah. Okay, I told you it was fast. This one is a quick one. So I'll have Rosie pass out some samples so you guys can actually try it, and then we will go into the nutrition stuff, which I'm excited to share with you. So let me just clean up my board here. Thanks, Rosie. You can start with this one, and then if anybody wants to try this one, well, this one will be a little bit different because it's got the different quantities, but it looks right. I don't have a fork to taste it. I should do that. Hold on. I've got gloves on still. This one's a little tangier. Got a little more heat too. If you like spicier, that one's spicier.
So Raquel, where did you get the guitar?
That particular one I got at Whole Foods, but what I wanted to share, good question, thank you for reminding me. You can find it in bulk too. So like Central Market. I have sometimes seen it at some HEBs. Online is also another option. Oh, that's probably where I saw the different varieties of za'atar originally. So when I lived in Seattle, there was a wonderful place called World Spice Market, and they carry spices from everywhere. And you could just buy them in the little, quarter ounce or whatever, super inexpensive. And you can still do that. You just have to purchase it online. So occasionally, if I'm looking for something kind of rare, like whatever I want to cook with, I'll order some spices from there, and I can still order just small quantities, which is great. Here, just in the medical center, we have wonderful not restaurants, but we do, grocery stores. And so you probably could find some of these even cheaper in some of those grocery stores. I don't know if maybe the Alibaba grocery store probably carries that. I need to get in there. I haven't seen what they have, but I feel like I would be a kid in a candy store if I went to that grocery store. So, but yeah, This one in particular, though, just came in the jar, but I have definitely purchased it. I just didn't have a chance to get to Central Market before today, but I've seen it there. And that's typically what I tend to do. Like, I'll have my little spice jars at home and just refill them, because that way I keep my spices a little bit fresher, and I just buy what I need. And they're not that expensive. So you can kind of play around and experiment with what you try. Central Market usually has. Yeah. Yeah, they have some pretty good ones. Yeah, not too expensive. All right, so this recipe serves about 6 to 8, kind of depending on how hungry your friends are. But like I said, it is kind of a nice one because it could be used as like a base to a grain bowl. It could be used as a filling to a wrap, or just as a simple side. And you can use it. You could eat it either warm, room temp, or just cold the next day. And the flavors will continue to develop. And yeah, what I like to do is just kind of give it a little more drizzle, because that farro, since it's a grain, it's going to absorb a lot of that flavor, but it's also, you might need to adjust your seasoning just to make sure that you still have all that great flavor. And that's also why I add the citrus to just kind of really make some of this pop. The citrus, the red pepper flakes, and then the additional oil, because fat is flavor and olive oil is a good fat. So we want that. Okay, so. Yeah, right. It's a little different, but it's got some good elements in it, and it's super easy to make. So it's very hearty. Yeah, that's what I like about it too. Sometimes if I'm really busy and I just want something to kind of quickly warm up after work, this is a kind of a go-to that I'll make. So, okay. Well, while you all are enjoying that, I'm going to move on to our nutrition. Farro, yes. So farro, I mentioned, good source of fiber, good source of protein. Also rich in iron and magnesium, which as women, we definitely want to make sure we have good levels of iron and magnesium in our diet. Magnesium helps as we get older, as I understand, to help make sure that we regulate hormones and we're getting enough sleep at night and all that kind of good stuff. Kale, definitely antioxidant rich, and also dark leafy greens, right? We were talking about trying to incorporate more of those. They're rich also in fiber, iron, and vitamin C. And I always try to point that out. Like, people think about citrus and vitamin C, especially oranges, but your green veggies like broccoli, these dark leafy greens, are also a great source of vitamin C. The mushrooms definitely have some, it says, I looked up and it said, definitely helps fight some cancer cells, protects our heart, so cardiovascular health, prevents inflammation, which is also something that we've always talked about. Like, anything to help reduce inflammation, especially in those critical organs like our brain and our heart, to keep us healthy, to keep that cognitive decline and aging of our brain at bay, and then also good for nerve health. And they just taste great. So like I said, you could use any kind of mushroom. These are my favorites. I mean, look how cool they look. This is actually, I didn't show you this. Look how cool this is. That's great. Let's see, and za'atar, yes. So all of the different ingredients in za'atar: thyme, sumac, toasted sesame seeds, sometimes oregano, marjoram, and then just kind of varies by the region. Okay, so moving on to the archetype diet. So I came across this book a couple months ago, but I hadn't had a chance to give it a listen. I tend to do audiobooks these days, but I make the mistake of starting them when I'm about to go to bed. And so I'm like, chapter 7, wait, hold on. But this one caught my eye and my attention because it is based on, I think a lot of people are now starting to look outside of the typical, like, consume less calories, burn more calories mentality, right? Because we are not a one-size-all type of culture anymore. And we never really were, but that was sort of how diet culture tends to relate. It's like, do this and you will look like this. And if everybody does this, they will look like this. Or it's a matter of willpower or whatever. I think everybody is so individual. And so the way that you approach how you take care of your body, not even when it comes to weight loss, that's not even a thing, but like just how you take care of your body so that you can continue to live out your old age in good health, should be very individual. And if we teach people how to pay attention to that and how to listen to that, then I always appreciate when I come across literature like this that kind of makes it more about the individual. This one in particular, so it's based on a book called The Archetype Diet by a woman named Dana James. And she is a nutritionist and a functional medicine practitioner. And she wrote this book using kind of like psychology too. So if you remember Carl Jung, one of the famous psychotherapists, he came up with the idea of like basically patterns of behavior and developed different types of archetypes. Well, she sort of took that concept but came up with almost personality types based on what she's seen, and she's counseled and worked with many, many women. So this is kind of women focused, but I think men could kind of fall into this category too, these categories. But typically we'll see these kinds of characteristics in women a lot. And so she basically wanted to say, how can we identify sort of a category that we might recognize in ourselves and then determine like how to, because she saw, she treated so many women, she's like, these are the common things that I keep seeing that keep coming up. So it was based on sort of their personality, their eating behaviors, kind of their body types were all very similar for the certain archetypes that she came up with, which I find fascinating. But it's all based on this pattern of behavior. And so her book looks at how we source our self-worth, and then how we feel in turn affects how we behave and how we eat. And I think that is the key. And sometimes we don't realize that, like some of these things are rooted in our childhood, like how we were brought up, just sort of the things that we were exposed to. And so what I like about her too is that she talks about these specific archetypes, but she says, you might identify with one or maybe a couple. But really what she wants to do is help women, especially, start to really work through kind of the negative or sort of the more challenging aspects of their archetype so that they develop the positive characteristics of all of the different archetypes, because they're really awesome. So there are 4. We're going to talk about 2 today. The first 2 are the nurturer and the Wonder Woman. And then the other 2 are the femme fatale and the ethereal. And I love the categories. I think many, many women tend to fall into this first one. And so as I read along, you all may recognize some of these. Nod your head, raise your hand. But the nurturer, their whole belief system or how they source their self-worth is based on essentially, I'm worthy because of how I care for you, how I care for others, right? Always putting others first. And so I kind of mapped out some things which I thought were interesting. So she talks about typically you'll see them choosing careers like being healers, social workers, nurses, assistants, chefs, taking care of people through food, guilty. And so the personality characteristics tend to be someone who's very empathetic, very dependable, very loyal. They can be thoughtful, instinctively know what makes other people happy, right? Like they can read the room, sometimes absorbing a lot of that emotion of everybody else. They don't like to disappoint. They may have instances where they even feel sick to their stomach physically if they know they've upset somebody. They tend to ruminate. They tend to kind of go over things over and over in their head, like, oh my God, how did I make this person feel? Oh, I did that so terrible. Like they just kind of they're stuck in their heads. And they put themselves last. And so it's always like you before me. I'm happy when you're happy. So they're the caretakers, all of that. But they are fiercely loyal. So you might find them as sort of this mother hen figure, right? Like they take care of their own. They're good with their friends. They're that dependable one. You can call it like 3 a.m. and they'll pick up the phone. But however, when they do that, they give and give and give. And so they're often feeling exhausted or depleted. And if they feel like they take a little bit of time for themselves, that seems almost indulgent. And so that's kind of the characteristic of the nurturer. When it comes to food, they're afraid to be empty. And so they use food as solace when they need to be comforted. And a lot of people do that. So I think a lot of people kind of have some elements of this personality type. But of all the archetypes, the author mentions the nurturer is the one that when they eat, it's very reflective of their emotional state. And so they tend to comfort eat, they tend to binge eat, they tend to have addictive food behaviors. They may even be secret food eaters, so stashing little treats here or stashing food somewhere so that nobody can find them. And they'll kind of take that food when nobody's looking and enjoy it. I used to, did I tell you guys the story about when I was little and I loved cheese? And I don't know what made me think about this, but I had this pillowcase and it folded on the bottom. And I fell asleep with a slice of cheese. Fell asleep with a slice. I was like, I don't know, 5. And my mom was washing, doing laundry, and she said, "Were you hungry? Because I found this piece," and it was already like a hardened piece of cheese in between the pillowcase. And I was just like, who knew I would grow up to be in food, right? I mean, that was the story right there. So nurturers, however, when it comes to like the physical body, they tend to have higher levels of insulin and estrogen. And so over time, too much insulin makes fat burning more difficult. So extra weight gets added and it gets put on all over the body, not just in certain parts. And so their body type tends to be a little more curvy and full-figured. But when it comes to the food prescription, this one, they mentioned of all the archetypes, the nurturer is the most sensitive to carbohydrates and will need to choose foods to help balance blood sugar levels and hormones, right? Because it goes back to that high levels of estrogen and insulin. So a dish like this might be in moderation because we've got some carbs in here, obviously, from some of the things that we've added, chickpeas, the grain, right? The foods that rebalance the nurturer. So this is what I found interesting because I definitely fall into this category and I've noticed that this is sort of my diet. Cruciferous foods, so things like the Brussels sprouts, the broccoli, the cauliflower, detoxifies estrogen and decreases insulin resistance. So those kinds of vegetables are really good to incorporate for this particular characteristic and archetype. Seeds, but not nuts, because nuts can be a little too dense and too heavy to process. So things like we've done like pumpkin seeds, we've got sesame seeds in here, flax seeds are great, grilled fish, raw salads, any kind of warming spices to kind of rev up that metabolism. So think things like turmeric, ginger, cinnamon, right? And red fruits and vegetables, which I found interesting because it relates to, she goes into more of like chakras and things like that, which is cool. But red fruits and vegetables are for grounding. And so this is kind of the area that when it comes to like emotional stability, this particular archetype really needs that support in. So strawberries, raspberries, red bell peppers, beets, things like that. She even talks about like wear red dresses, wear that red lipstick, like all of those things to kind of help that person stay grounded. Because we tend to be moody and sort of emotional. And then foods that should be kept to a minimum are things like grains, legumes. So we've got 2 of those in this dish. Nuts, so like nut butters, anything like peanut butter, almond butters can be too dense and lead to stagnation, like I mentioned. Red meat, and dairy, which stimulates insulin and makes weight management more difficult, and then sweets. So sweets, I think definitely the sugar, all of that, just kind of keeping that in moderation. Suggested exercise. So this one I found interesting too. Running, boxing, HIIT, circuit training, dancing, and yoga. So for this particular body type, she's recommending more like high intensity because it helps to boost that metabolism, boost the thyroid, and circulate lymphatic fluid, which tends to kind of accumulate when you have these sort of too much estrogen, the high insulin. So if you can't, like, I'm getting older, I can't do HIIT classes or boxing, but I find things that I enjoy. So like I do a lot of walking. I love my cycle class. I love to dance now. So I get out. So find the things that you enjoy. She definitely goes into some, if you're interested in checking out the book, she goes into an actual prescription diet plan for like a 10-day meal thing, which I think some of it is a little bit like, okay, well, that's a bit extreme. But most of it is kind of based on sort of this idea of like, these are the things that scientifically work for this body type because you're identifying like medically what's happening in the body for this kind of personality type or this body type. So I appreciate that. But things like, starting your morning with something warm, like a cup of lemon tea or like a cinnamon tea or something, instead of having coffee, or just kind of getting that body acclimated. I had a holistic medicine doctor say, it was like an acupuncturist, say, you've got too many issues in your gut because you're too damp. And so you need to not drink lots of water that's cold or room temp. You need to do warm water. I was like, okay, that makes sense. Like once you identify kind of what your body responds to, pay attention to that. And so when you read things like this, take it with a little bit grain of salt, but take it with what you know, because that's the key. It's like recognizing what works for your body. And then, if some of these things you want to try out. I definitely have been a guinea pig for many of these things because I've dealt with a lot of health issues. And so I'm always like the canary in the coal mine. I will do it for my research. And some things really work well. And some things I'm like, that just didn't work for me. So I'm going to continue to do what works for my body. Okay, so anybody relate to some of those characteristics? Yeah, we got a couple, right? We got a couple for sure. Okay, so the other one is the other archetype that we're going to talk about today is the Wonder Woman. And so the Wonder Woman's belief system, or where she sources her self-worth from, is I'm worthy because of what I do. So she is the Wonder Woman. She is the doer. She tends to gravitate towards these high-powered jobs, like the CEOs, the VPs, the women who are just kind of in all of it, running things. But they don't always have to work outside the home. They could be sort of that overachieving stay-at-home mom who's got like a million things that she's got on her busy schedule, which is fantastic. But one of the things that was mentioned in the book was, even with that, if there is not enough for this type of person or personality type to keep them busy, they can tend to overcompensate and over hyper focus on things that might not even be there in relation to their body. So they might think, oh, I'm too this or that, and it's like, nope, you're just like looking for things to continue to be busy with, right? So that's kind of sort of on the other side of this person is very very like driven, ambitious, but if something happens where they're not appreciated or acknowledged, they don't want to put themselves in a situation where they can be seen as like being in a position to fail. So they have also two sides of the coin. So they're very ambitious, they're very driven, motivated definitely by success and achievement. They expect the best from themselves and definitely from others, and they rarely crack under pressure. Which, can you imagine that? Like, that is a lot of stress to put on yourself. They embody feminine strength. They are very resilient, very courageous. The phrase that often gets kind of tossed around, if you want something done well, give it to a Wonder Woman. Give it to a woman. I mean, wants to be known as a person of depth, and they believe they can accomplish anything they set their mind to. I love people like that because they see solutions, they don't see problems, and I appreciate that. Let's see, they want to leave a legacy. That's really important to them. And they measure their success by environment and social structure. So like the beautiful house, the beautiful husband, the beautiful kids, all of that. When they're out of balance, however, their experiences can be amplified and they can also withdraw. So they kind of, the two sides of the coin. They can either have this excessive pursuit of recognition, so more effort that they put into it, the more success, but then they're not sleeping, they're skipping meals, they're not eating, withdrawing from intimacy, in relationships, upset when anybody kind of brings them down, slows them down. And they often are physically and just like emotionally starving for food, for attention. And so they can feel this emptiness as well. And they can not prioritize like affection, attention, and they can become paralyzed for fear of criticism and humiliation. So, for example, in their quest to be a nobody, they can become overwhelmed and disconnected from others. So this one is much more kind of like almost a yin and a yang, like they're super intense or they can completely withdraw, which, to go from 0 to 60 and back like that, that's also hard. That's a lot of strain on somebody. So eating behavior, this one is kind of different. So they definitely have a kind of what they call a peaceful relationship with food. So they're not really overindulgent. They know what to eat for their body and mood. They don't really control what they're eating. They trust how food nourishes them. If the Wonder Woman gains weight, she knows what to do to get the body back into balance. On the flip side, when she's out of balance, she can be a mindless eater, so skipping meals, and then having kind of this all or nothing attitude, like wine is great for me. I'm going to drink a bunch of it because it's good in antioxidants, and like maybe overindulging in that. They tend to have a body type that's shaped by high cortisol. So they tend to carry a lot of weight kind of in this midsection, maybe excess belly fat. And then if it is left untreated, it can lead to fatigue, affect the adrenals, so adrenal depletion and a thyroid imbalance. So that's kind of the body structure. And when it comes to kind of these other things with what's the food prescription, the trick here is to address the hormonal imbalances. So adrenaline, the cortisol, the noradrenaline, all of these things, these neurotransmitters that help during that kind of fight or flight, because they're in stress a lot of times, right? They're kind of doing, always moving. At the right level, they can be helpful in burning fat, but when they're out of whack, they can inhibit the metabolism. And so they can also, when your cortisol's too high, can affect your liver function and also how your body removes toxins. So you might end up with burnout, fatigue, weight gain, depression, all of those kind of not so fun things. The way that we help the Wonder Woman rebalance is through, again, like lean protein. So poultry, fish, again, with the salads, just kind of healthy vegetables. Yellow is the color for this particular group. Cooked vegetables, yellow fruits and vegetables, pineapple, bell peppers, tomatoes, things like that. Bitter vegetables for the thyroid. So things like arugula, anything like another bitter green. So kale's kind of like that, but arugula, maybe radicchio, if you've seen that kind of purple, almost like lettuce vegetable. Nuts are okay, seeds are okay, and then small amounts of beans and grains, but not together because of carbs are okay, but the combination can be a little too much. And then foods that should be kept to a minimum are things like dairy, gluten, soy, and sweets. And then for this particular archetype, high intensity exercise as well to burn off the excess adrenaline, right, from always going. Weight training, jumping rope, that's kind of fun if you can do that. Circuit training, some variety, right, and dancing, biking, and then yoga. So anybody associate with the Wonder Woman body type? Yes. And what I like about it, when we talk next week about the other two archetypes, is that really we all kind of carry a little bit of all of these at some point in our lives. And I think that's okay. And I really love and appreciate the fact that this author wants women to celebrate all of that and really emphasize, if you're in a position where you're not feeling sort of the motivation, the drive, and whatever it is. It doesn't even have to be career. It could just be in your home life or just kind of in general, like your state. Like, what do you need to get to do that? Sometimes it's food related, right? Like if you're out of whack, you kind of know. Like we've been living in our skin for a while and we're kind of like, yeah, when I eat this way, I just don't feel great. I might feel great for a few minutes, but then I just feel terrible. Or when I eat this, I just feel sluggish because it does this to my stomach or whatever. So that's the thing that I always try to impress upon people. It's like really pay attention to your own body. And if there are things like this that can kind of make you think just a little differently and you want to give it a try, I'm all for that. So any questions? I know I kind of walked through this a little quickly, but any questions or kind of thoughts on just kind of a slightly different take on our nutrition today?
I think I actually want to get that book. That sounds kind of interesting.
Yeah, there's a quiz that you can take as well. She starts with a little quiz, and it's like 20 some questions, but if I can remember to do it for our last class, I will bring it so that you guys can take the quiz. But it's interesting because she'll say, okay, answer all these questions and then tally up the numbers, and whatever category that is the highest, that's your archetype. But you might find that you fall into a couple of these. So you kind of pick, I kind of fell into the first two. Actually, no, I fell into the nurturer and the ethereal because I'm kind of, a little woo-woo sometimes. But yeah, so it's interesting though, because I mean, sometimes I can fall into some of these other ones, or I'd like to be more of those, but how do I get there, right? But it is kind of cool to see also when it comes to our diet and our eating patterns, like, yeah, when you're super busy and you're like focused on something, you forget to eat. You forget to take care of yourself. And we don't want to do that because that also causes spikes in our blood sugars because we have to maintain right throughout the day. And if you're skipping meals, but then you're overcompensating by eating, late at night and you're like, okay, I got to eat. But then you're just choosing whatever. Like we have to be a little more aware of those things. Okay, well, that's all I have for today. Well, thank you all for joining us at home as well, and I hope you guys try the recipe. It's a delicious one, and we'll be back to wrap things up with week 4 next week or the week after. Okay.